Thanks everybody for joining us for our fourth Tribal Energy and Climate Exchange meetings. We're excited to have some guests here from the Strategic Growth Council to talk about their affordable housing, sustainable communities, and transformative climate communities programs. And I will pass it over to Angie.
Hi everybody, Angie Hacker here, also with Prosper Sustainably. We're just really glad that folks continue to show up to these meetings. The purpose of these meetings is to remind everybody is to help California tribes pursue their energy and climate goals, and we do that by connecting regularly. We've been meeting about every couple of weeks so far to exchange knowledge on tribal clean energy and adaptation resilience from the field. And what we're really focused on is trying to learn about and share feedback on some resources and opportunities for tribes and tribal serving agencies. And of course, and we'll get to this in just a second, we'll do a brief plug because we are really jamming on the California Tribal Gaps analysis, which is intended to inform future resource opportunities for tribes in the areas of clean energy and climate change. And we're getting close to the deadline to have your tribe complete a questionnaire. So we'll talk about that next. First, let's do a little bit more introductions. If you wouldn't mind, folks in the chat, if you could just go ahead and add your I'm going to admit some more people here. Add your name, organization, locations, and we're also so fortunate. Today we are joined by Jerry Rivero. He is with Josh. Actually, could you do this introduction?
Yeah, Angie, I think it's you're kind of jumping ahead.
I was just on the agenda.
Okay. Yeah, we'll be doing introductions of them before we transition over. So I did welcome.
Okay, great. So yeah, why don't we go ahead and do our quick CTGA update before we move?
Yeah, so as a reminder, the Tribal and Energy and Climate Exchange meetings are being funded by the California Tribal Gap Analysis Project, and we want to continue to drive attention to that in the questionnaire we have going on right now. So the CTGA project is funded by the California Energy Commission and being administered by Strategic Growth Council, led by Prosper Sustainably, where its primary goals are to identify tribes' priorities, needs, and barriers in the areas of clean energy, climate change adaptation, and climate change resilience. And through identifying the priorities, needs, and barriers of tribes in these areas, we are going to be providing recommendations for future state programs, funding, technical assistance, and other resources to address needs, and also hopefully to overcome barriers for tribes in accessing programs provided by the state. So the needs assessment and the recommendations will be primarily informed, shaped by tribal input. Angie, can you mute yourself? I think I'm getting feedback from you or somebody. Primarily informed and shaped by tribal input, which is gathered through the tribal questionnaire. So we are administering the questionnaire for this project right now. It closes at the end of September, and we have about almost 24 tribes so far participated. And really, the more tribes that participate, the more impactful our findings and recommendations are going to be. So please, if you have not already, register. And if you have registered and have your questionnaire, please get rolling on it. I'm starting to send out some reminders as well. But we want you to participate to ensure that your tribe's needs, priorities, and goals are captured to inform future state investments to address those needs. You will also receive direct access to the database of existing funding and other opportunities that are available for tribes in the areas to address clean energy and climate change needs. And then you will also be a part of the report and reviewing the report that will finally be released in the spring, which is going to be released also to all the agencies throughout California so that they're better informed as they move their programs forward. So you can, feel free to email me. Also, you can sign up and register at caltribalgapanalysis.org. If you have already reached out and for some reason you're not seeing your questionnaire, again, follow up with me as well.
Josh, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Sure. So you said there's only been a couple of dozen tribes that have completed the questionnaire?
So far, yes.
Yeah. So being that there's, like 150 in the state of California, what do you think the barrier is, or why tribes aren't participating as much as they should be?
Well, I mean, my personal opinion is people are extremely busy, extremely spread thin right now. There has been, interest there's, I think we've sent out, we only send out the questionnaires when there's been some level of interest or participation in these. And I think we've sent out over 100 questionnaires so far. And I think so there's an intention for tribes to complete these. And they just, at this point, I think likely we're going to see a huge influx and hopefully a very huge influx this month of questionnaires being completed. So we've been, we're finally at the firm deadline of the end of September to get these completed. So, but any suggestions, any recommendations, certainly are very much welcome, or other thoughts are welcome and appreciated.
For those that have participated, we've had generally good feedback about the process. I don't think there's any problems for folks that have participated. Yeah,
and generally it's taken about a 1 hour for tribes who have, if there's been one person completing it, it's been about 1 hour. And if it's, more than one person, it's tend to be almost 2 hours or so. And, but yeah, it's been very, very good feedback on the questionnaire. And I guess one thing I'll add too is that the questions we're asking are also, I think, informative for each tribe. So, I've received the feedback that the tribes that go through the questionnaire and consider their needs, their goals, their priorities, barriers. This is a bit of their own needs assessment. So we will provide a copy of your answers to you for each tribe that participates so that you can use that information as a starting point for beginning some of your planning in these areas as well. But great question. Thank you.
Any other questions on that? All right, well, we're excited to hear from more and more of you that are beginning to complete your questionnaires, and it's all related to this next slide, which is a roundtable announcements and discussion section where really we're going to talk about any relevant information for your fellow participants, other tribal serving practitioners. And so if there are resources or opportunities or experiences or events or things that you want to make sure other folks like you in California would benefit from knowing about, this is the time to share that. While you're thinking, and you can raise your hand, you could throw it in the chat, but you could also just say it out loud, and that would be great to hear your voice. On the right there on this slide is just a little cut and paste of what was actually a little small piece of what's in your emails. And we continue to send these emails about weekly. We're updating these resource and opportunities lists with new things that we're finding, if there's a new deadline coming up. And so we encourage you to continue to look at that, because there's a lot happening, whether it's a training or a conference or a grant opportunity. So it sounds like somebody might have something to share. Maybe not. I do want to mention one thing. I do some work on the local government side of things as well. And I just want to mention too that if any folks on the line, if your tribe happens to be within a territory that might be covered by one of the state's 3 regional energy networks, or one of over 20 California community choice aggregation programs, that those are, there's a lot of opportunities there to access some services that relate to energy efficiency for, residential, business, electrification incentives, if you're trying to transition over, solar and storage incentives, electric car or even bike incentives to bring down the purchase price, even charging station rebates. So, sometimes you can go to your investor-owned utility for some of these things, but more and more these regional organizations are also offering really good services, oftentimes easier to use. And so I just wanted to bring that up and encourage anybody who might have any experience with that to share whether or not they have access to any of those services. And I see Larry has his hand up.
Great, thank you. My name is Larry Riera. I'm with the California Energy Commission, and I wanted to highlight an upcoming solicitation, hopefully within the next 15-30 days, that will be hitting the streets. It is titled the Ideal ZEV Workforce Pilot. It's a workforce training and development opportunity that will focus on zero emission vehicles deployments, light duty, medium, heavy duty, on-road, off-road, sort of all this sort of ZEV space, if you will, and workforce training and development. I will go ahead and put in the chat a link to a workshop we had earlier this year, but please recognize it's a little bit stale. What will be hitting the streets will be, we've taken a lot of public feedback, and certainly, participants today have provided some good feedback to round it out, if you will, this opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry.
Angie, you prompted me before the meeting to bring up, and I've I guess might as well, because it seems like it's almost ancient history, but there actually is still SGIP rebate funding available for tribes that are located in high fire threat districts, up for trust lands. Well, actually not just trust lands, but tribes and communities that are in eligible disadvantaged communities that are served by SoCalGas. It doesn't seem to make sense, but SoCalGas has money for energy storage under the equity resilience, the SGIP equity resilience budget. So I'm actually in conversations with 2 tribes right now, and the SGIP rebates, equity resilience rebates, are, depending on the circumstances of the project, are funding up to 100%, and in most cases funding 100% of energy storage projects. So I will try to find a link to that and drop it in the chat. Oops, sorry. Just as a reminder. So if you happen to be located in SoCalGas territory and are interested in learning more, feel free to reach out.
I'll just also touch on the 2 links I posted. One is, a lot of you have seen from ITEP, the status of tribes and climate change report that just came out. So I've linked to that. And also the Climate Science Alliance, which is based here in California, has a report that they just came out with, and it is called Building Authentic Collaborations with Tribal Communities, a Living Reference for Climate Practitioners. So I put both of those in the chat, relevant materials. Anybody else have any announcements? All right. Well, if you do have anything at any point in time, feel free to send those my way. We'll keep including these in the weekly emails we're sending. So thanks, everybody.
Great. So we'll move on to our featured discussion of today. So today we have from the Strategic Growth Council, Shep Wilburn, who's a program analyst with the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program, and also Jerry Rivero with the Transformative Climate Change, the Transformative Climate Communities program. We're going to talk about these funding opportunities for tribes, and I will pass it over to you. Actually, Jerry, you can just assume control now and take it away.
Thank you. Let me pull this presentation up for a second here. All right, can you all see the presentation on the screen?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, so we'll start off. Thank you again for allowing us the opportunity to present today. Today we will be talking to 2 of the programs at Strategic Growth Council, Affordable Housing, Sustainable Communities, and Transformative Climate Communities. And we'll start off with Shep. I can control it, Shep. If you just want to tell me when to advance slides, I can definitely do that.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks, Sherry. Next slide, please. So I guess first, hi everyone, Shep Wilburn, program analyst for AHSC. So essentially AHSC is a program that is not only a housing program, but also sort of a transportation program. And it aims to sort of take this sort of unique approach to a community, looking at how those 2 pieces fit together. And I guess just in terms of AHSC's awarded amount so far, it's over 1.5 billion. And for each project grant, between $1 to $30 million are available. Next slide, please. So yeah, to get a bit more into the funding, AHSC receives annual funding until 2030 through cap and trade proceeds. For this current round, or at least the round that just passed, round 6, the overall sort of pot for all of the projects was 405 million. And you can sort of see based on the graphic here, sort of how the funding has changed over the different rounds. Next slide, please. So to sort of try to make sure that all communities within the state are able to be competitive and sort of fit the program. The program has 3 different sort of eligible project types. TOD is sort of for the most dense areas. ICP is sort of for everything between rural and those most dense areas, and probably of most interest to folks, but not necessarily, is the Rural Innovation Project area, which sort of covers the rural areas of the state, and its sort of requirements are 15 units per acre, and it sort of has to meet certain definitions for rural, and it has to be on an infill site. And below there are just a few examples of different components that can be fit into an AHSC project to sort of achieve, I guess, this picture to the left, which is kind of an idealized AHSC project community. Next slide, please. So in terms of eligibility, these 3 columns sort of lay out the eligible applicants, programs that are eligible for funding, and capital projects. Capital projects sort of covers the actual housing and infrastructure related to the housing. And then also sort of the transit aspect. So the actual vehicles, the sidewalks, the bike lanes, and then TRA, which are sort of the transit related amenities that make the experience of transit better. And the AHSC applicants, and I tried to put some of the roles that might be of most interest in orange. So public housing authorities, or housing authorities more generally, transit agencies, public and nonprofit developers, and program operators, and of course the specifically called out qualified tribal entity, but also a tribal entity can fall under those other categories. And yeah, in the middle are some of the programs that are eligible for funding, which, yeah, I don't necessarily need to get into. So next slide, please. So this slide sort of aims to capture some of the, I guess, more significant definitions that we have in the program. I think all of these are longer than they appear on here, but sort of in terms of being a qualified tribal entity, and sort of how that then connects with being eligible for the tribal set aside. And to, I guess, go back to what I was trying to get at a bit with the orange font in one of the previous slides, is that to be considered for the tribal set aside, the applicant, the tribal applicant needs to be either the developer or a project partner responsible for the transportation elements. They cannot just be a sort of a program operator or implementer. And then sort of at the bottom here, some really quick notes on the types of eligible tribal land. But like I was saying earlier, those definitions are a decent amount longer in the actual guidelines. Next slide, please. So this was the first project that sort of was awarded through AHSC through the tribal set aside. And that came from the Iraq Indian Housing Authority. And so that's one of the primary reasons why I highlighted the Housing Authority before. But their sort of total award came out to 11 million. They were able to sort of integrate a multi-use trail. And that's what this graphic to the left shows. 36 affordable units in Arcata. And yeah, just a few additional facts on there included as well. Next slide, please. And so I guess sort of to wrap up my part, at least for now, if you are interested in AHSC there is a technical assistance program, and it offers sort of a wide range of services to potential applicants. And applicants are sort of chosen based on a variety of criteria, but usually we try to draw them from areas that might not have as much success if they didn't have some extra help. And I guess to be more specific, there are actually several spots that are sort of reserved for potential tribal applicants each year. So yeah, and then the TA providers can help with direct application, sort of like actually putting together the application, capacity building in terms of preparing you and bringing together all the pieces so that you can apply. And then sort of below that are some specifics that they can help with. And yeah, with that, I'll turn it back over to Jerry.
Thanks, Shep. Josh and others, I see that Thomas Gates has his hand up. Should we take time for questions now, or do you want to leave that towards the end? I think.
I mean, I think it'd be great to take questions like about AHSC in between, just before we transition over. We should have time for that.
That sounds
quick
great.
question. Hey, Shep, a quick question for you. I noticed on one of the earlier slides, it talked about the definition of rural and the definition for an infill site. Where can tribes find that definition? Is that somewhere in the solicitation, or how can they figure that out?
Yeah, it is somewhere in the guidelines. And in terms of the definition of rural, I think for the most part, our definition aligns pretty well with the TCAC definition. And I think for the TCAC definition, they then sort of offer you, I think it's 3 or 4 options to verify that, one of which I think is using, what is it, USDA, and then there are a few other options that I can't recall, but I can try to look that up and put it in the chat while the rest of the meeting is going on. In Infill, I believe at least part of that definition is one, it can't be sort of land slated to be preserved for either natural purposes or agricultural purposes. But I think more specifically, I think it needs to be surrounded on 3 out of the 4 sides by urban uses, but I can double check that as well.
So apologies, we're having some computer difficulties over here. So, but I think I really do think it'd be good to take some questions right now. And can you go back, Shep, to the eligible communities as well, and just, you know, because I think for tribes, particularly those without federal recognition, are going to want to, you know, consider what are some other pathways for them to pursue this funding.
Yeah.
So this is the tribal entities, you know, so this is for federally recognized tribes. And then, so, you know, but a tribe without federal recognition may have a nonprofits that they pursue it through. Was that an eligible entity as well? Could you just go back to that other screen that had all the eligible entities?
Oh, I think, yeah, that one. So I guess maybe, can you repeat that? Are you sort of asking, can a tribe sort of partner with a nonprofit developer?
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying, looking at over this and just ensuring that, we consider the other pathways for tribes as well to pursue these funding
Yeah.
opportunities.
And I think part of it is that we have not, there's been a limited, I guess, amount of test cases so far. I think we received one tribal application in round 5, and I think we may have received one tribal application in round 6. But there has been some talk about, I'm trying to run through my notes really quickly. I think it was AB 1010 and sort of understanding and working with HCD to see how possible it is to allow tribes to, I think, work with another entity to use their experience to fulfill some requirements. But I also don't know if any conclusion was reached on that because yeah, I'd have to check.
Okay, so another question I had too. So back in that funding, it looked like the funding had dropped from round 4 to round 5. Was that a product of just the available funding through the legislature, or was that just less projects? There were less qualifying projects that came through.
I think it was probably more likely related to sort of the cap and trade revenue. And I guess if there's a dip in sort of interest in cap and trade, then that carries over into the funds that are available for the next round.
Okay, so I have a hand raised and then a question was in the chat box. I'll do the question in the chat box because it's been there. So Sally Peterson asks, who and where would we contact for technical support on these grant applications?
Yeah, so and I think I included a link in the final slide. We have a form that we request that interested parties fill out and sort of submit to the program and the TA providers. And yeah, that the round 6 survey to request TA, that's actually still open. And if folks wanted to use that, that would work. I would also sort of encourage you all to send an email over to either myself or the sort of general AHSC inbox. And if those addresses are not in the PowerPoint anywhere, I can definitely leave those in the chat. Yeah, I think that's usually the best way, and we'll probably update that at some point in the future. But for now, that is one of the better ways to, I guess, get the process going.
Okay, and we have a question from Luya. Go ahead, Luya. If we can't hear you, we can, I think you unmuted. Somehow we're not hearing you. Technology. If you go into your settings in Zoom, like next to your microphone, so there's a little like upward pointing arrow. If you select that, and maybe that you just change your microphone. Well, why don't you keep trying and say, try making changes and we have another one, another question in the meantime, and you can try typing your question. So thanks for being on camera. It's unfortunate that I see you have a great headset on and everything. Colleen Rogier, I believe that's how you pronounce your last name. She said, I heard your definition of, Connie Collins first asked, so for non-federally recognized tribes, is there a bottom line? Does nonprofit status itself work? And Shep, you're muted right now.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't know. I would have to check on that. But I don't necessarily think that using a nonprofit is going to automatically be a easy workaround. But that's something I'll have to check back on.
Well, it's a nonprofit. So as a nonprofit developer, so if the nonprofit took the status as the developer, then that, would qualify, I suppose. But, obviously there would be requirements for being a developer.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to remember a series of correspondence we had. I think there was a theoretical question about whether or not a sort of California tribe could work with say a tribe from outside of the state, or a tribal entity from outside of the state, to sort of help with meeting experience requirements, but I can't remember exactly what came of that or what the response was. But that something like that could potentially be a way to sort of, I guess, buttress experience. I don't know if it goes, it can go too much further than that, even if it were something that was allowed.
Okay. So we have another question, and perhaps you could just, look into it and follow up after.
Yeah.
So Colleen Rossier, I heard your definition of infill here, but was wondering if there's a place I could read that definition online and get the specifics.
Yeah, I was just getting ready to, I just started to type a response. I'm going to try to go into our guidelines and pull that out quickly during the course of the meeting. Hopefully I can turn that around.
Yeah, and then Shep, one thing and for Jerry as well, following the meeting too, what we can do is if you want to follow up on some questions and develop some specific responses, we can actually send an email to all meeting registrants afterwards as well with responses. So Linnea, you have your hand up.
Good morning, everybody. So I had a quick question on the funding. I know that the rural definition is 15 units per acre, and that doesn't quite mix with how the reservation currently develops, our tribal lands. Typically, a tribal assignee will be given an acre, maybe up to half an acre. We do have a housing authority that's building like a 22-unit complex, but the apartment buildings aren't necessarily something that we've developed here. We have tribal members that are often walking along, State Highway 96 or county roads, and there's no room to bike or walk, and it's really dangerous. And I think that this, if possible, it would be better to kind of reconsider some of those true rural developments that need to happen with transportation. There's no lighting. Sometimes there's places where it's dark. There's no solar panels for people walking and biking along those highways. And we have had accidents. And I think that, that could be a consideration that might not necessarily meet the definition of the program, but it's definitely, and there's a lot of reservations out there that are rural in that same kind of scenario. So I know, Shep, you mentioned that some of the projects have to be abutted up by on three sides by some urban development. Is that a requirement for the project?
I believe so. I'm going to check during the course of the call, but I think that was one of the requirements to make sure that it's sort of not a green field development, which means sort of like taking up new land. And I guess to speak really quickly to your point about lighting and pedestrian safety, those are like lighting and sidewalks can all be included in an AHSC project. But I guess the sort of, you still sort of have to have a housing component in addition to pieces like that.
Right. You know, Hoopa has at least 4 or 5 different housing developments. But like I said, they've only built one kind of apartment complex, you know, that meets that. That's not our traditional way of kind of condensing people into a, you know, small area. But I'm just saying, like, it might be nice to open those considerations up.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that would definitely be, I think that sort of input would be nice to hear, especially since we're planning on updating our guidelines over the next, I guess, few months or so. So yeah, um, I'll try to see if there are any links or connections we can provide to sort of offer an opportunity to make sure that we get that sort of input from folks.
Okay, so Lulia was able to at least type her question in. So when would a tribe be ready to apply? At what point in a housing project should they apply? So I think she's asking, you know, how far along do they need to be in order to be in a position to apply?
Yeah, I think all of the sort of all of the local regulatory processes need to be either wrapped up or very close to finished. So say like CEQA and sort of the approval processes. And I think it's sort of the sweet spot after sort of the approvals are passed, but also before there, there's any before sort of the project breaks ground for sure. So that sort of period in between there, I think that's usually the point you're aiming to hit when you're applying. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. And, you know, keep in mind that, you know, CEQA in of itself is not gonna, for tribes, if you're talking about trust lands, it's not gonna apply the same.
Yeah.
You know, I've worked on various state grants where basically the state defers to the tribe and the tribe stating whether or not it's met the environmental requirements of the tribe, which could have some, you know, federal nexus and overlap as well. But it, you know, can be harder, it can be, or it could be much easier, depending on what the tribe's requirements are.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat or any additional hands raised, and we have another program to go over. So I think maybe it's a good time to transition over to Jerry in the Transformative Climate Communities program.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Shep.
Thanks.
Great information.
Yeah. Great, thanks, Josh. So I'll try to be brief in our presentation. I think the purpose, at least, again, is to get some, for the TCC part as well, is to get some feedback from all of you all. And we'll actually have some questions, and hopefully it's an interactive discussion at the end of this, section of the presentation. So again, TCC is part of the California Climate Investments aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions, strengthening the economy, and improving public health and the environment, particularly in disadvantaged communities as defined by CalEnviroScreen. In addition to reducing GHG emissions, the TCC programming proposes to maximize community benefits, avoid displacement, include a comprehensive community engagement in all phases of the projects, includes additional leverage funds, and also funds technical assistance for grantees, which we will discuss further in the presentation. A key component, as you see in the slide, to TCC, it is groundbreaking strategy to take a place-based approach to community-led transformation. So previous rounds funded, so this is a map generally showing the locations of our implementation grants. We've had 3 rounds of funding in TCC's short history, and grants have been between 9 to 66.5 million. And again, this focuses on the top 25% of disadvantaged communities across the state. These are implementation grants. And then we'll show you here a map of planning grants. Planning grants are usually funded between $100,000 and $200,000. And then here we have, again, a general image of the locations across the state. Photos here are from the Transform Fresno participatory budget process, and then the Ontario Together, the image there on the bottom right, is the integrated projects from a project in Ontario. So project types in TCC, the investments are at the neighborhood level, project areas up to 5 square miles. We saw the differences between AHSC, where AHSC's investments are centered around the housing development and related connectivity projects. TCC's menu of project options focuses on amenities that support community connections and access to key destinations. AHSC is a project type option, and half of the TCC awards include an AHSC project. Communities can also choose other housing projects appropriate for local contexts, such as ADUs, accessory dwelling units, feasibility studies and toolkits, community land trusts, site identification, and first-time home ownership workshops. Again, something that's unique to this programming is that place-based approach. So the state makes targeted investments that meet the needs of the community. This also empowers communities to address climate change and equity challenges at the neighborhood scale. In order to reflect the community's vision and goals, TCC's design includes transformative elements, as you see here on the screen, as part of the funded projects. You'll see the community engagement plan is a requirement of TCC, where grantees work with community members and stakeholders through direct engagement, allowing residents to participate in the planning and governance of TCC. This engagement also includes participation of businesses and residents of the project area, again, through all phases of the TCC grant. We also include a workforce development and economic opportunity plan, where grantees must develop a plan that creates a workforce development and training programs with career pathways for residents of the project area, as well as a plan that provides economic opportunities through the creation of high quality jobs. As far as the displacement avoidance plan, this details actions that the grantees will take to establish policies and programs to avoid displacement of existing households and businesses within the project following the implementation of TCC programming. So a little bit about project eligibility, highlighting, like we mentioned earlier, a few things. The project area size for a TCC project is no larger than 5 square miles. At least 51% of the project area must overlap with census tracts within the top 10% of disadvantaged communities. But we're looking that this may expand in future rounds. The remaining 49% of the project area must overlap with either a disadvantaged community in the top 25% of Cal Enviro Screen or a low-income community as defined by AB 1550. The project also requires leverage funding. A TCC grantee must leverage additional funding to support the implementation of TCC projects. The match requirement is 50% of the award and only applies to implementation grants, and this is not for planning grants. Examples of leverage funds include federal, state, local, public-private, and/or philanthropic funds. The other component to this we talked about, like local governance, is the collaborative stakeholder structure, where grantees and partners must form a collaborative stakeholder structure which acts as the governing body of the entire TCC grant. The collaborative stakeholder structure includes residents and community-based organizations representing the project area. A little bit about technical assistance. This is an integral component of the TCC program. Technical assistance can help level the playing field for applicants across the state. Most recently, we utilized a third-party localized TA model where the TA provider is subcontracted with a community organization from each applicant community to support the application as well. If an applicant is awarded, they will also benefit from implementation and evaluation technical assistance. Awarded applicants are required to collect data on the progress of their projects. Give you a little example of a past project from round 3. This is the city of Oakland. In round 3, the city of Oakland was awarded $28,200,000 Projects submitted by the collaborative included a new aquaponics farm, trail education, a new affordable housing development, a bike share, and youth bike education program, and a tree planting project. We here would like to highlight the example of Planting Justice and Aquaponic Farm as an example of projects that TCC could fund in future rounds. This current project does not include a tribal partner, but Planting Justice has partnerships with a local trust for projects that are fundable under TCC. A little bit of background with Planting Justice, they purchased a 2-acre lot in the neighborhood to host the Rolling River Nursery plant collection. After 2 years of developing and cultivating this urban food production site, Planting Justice began a partnership with the Sogorea-Te Land Trust that will ultimately facilitate the transfer of Ohlone land back into native stewardship in the first project of its kind in the San Francisco Bay Area. So again, these are examples of potential projects. As far as future funding opportunities, I'll talk to you a little bit. I mentioned we've funded 3 rounds thus far in TCC funding. Under those first 3 guidelines, tribal governments are formally eligible as lead applicants, and federally recognized Indian tribes are eligible as partner applicants. And we'd like to know if other tribal entities would be more appropriate as partner applicants to ensure accessibility. And we'll ask that a little bit later on. To date, TCC has received 1 application. Fortunately, this was not awarded. That proposed land acquisition for the Sogorea-Te Land Trust in round 2. And again, part of this presentation is to conduct a more targeted outreach to tribes, and why we're here today to collect some input from all of you all to see what works best. Additionally, an executive order passed in 2019, California has a mandate to improve accessibility to tribes, and SGC has included this as a goal of its Racial Equity Action Plan. The TCC program is also dedicated to supporting the community-driven resilience in disadvantaged communities and is working to increase program access to communities, including tribes and disadvantaged unincorporated communities. And we look to include this in our forthcoming round 4 guidelines updates, which we are tentatively planning to release January of 2021. Again, like it says, we have a note there, pending funding availability. So with that, we'd like to open this up for questions and or feedback from the group. We have some questions that we maybe should have put in the slide, but maybe we could just drop them in the chat. My colleague, Sophie Young, is also on this call and she can help put those in. I don't know how to stop sharing here. Maybe I should keep sharing in case.
Yeah, keep sharing because I think we're going to reference your slides. Actually, if you can go back 1 slide, I just have a question right off the bat. Is what do you guys consider a difference between tribal governments and federally recognized tribes?
That's a great question, and I'm glad Sophie's on this call to help maybe field this. Sophie, can you?
I wasn't part of writing this, but this was with our legal counsel, and so I think my understanding is that tribal governments is more inclusive and it's not restricted to just federally recognized tribes. But I'm not.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess I would, inherently a federally recognized tribe is a tribal government in of itself. So is that, is it saying that a federally recognized tribe that's not a tribal government, which I think would be considered one and the same, would only be eligible as a partner applicant and not a lead applicant?
No, if it is included under tribal government, then it would be allowed to be a lead applicant. And I wanted to clarify, I think, this was based on our previous rounds where a lot of the projects were infrastructure driven and they require, they have various financial management capacity requirements, but we are looking to get feedback on how we can make sure that these requirements are more accessible to other entities that would like to participate.
Okay. So what I can, go ahead.
This is Angie, and I just thought you might want to touch a little bit on the relationship between DACs and tribes, and just, there's conversation around the state that DAC qualifying definition does not necessarily include tribes, but maybe might. So do you want to just kind of fill people in on that?
Yeah, thank you. We do understand that. I think sometimes the tribal lands do not always overlap with the CalEnviroScreen tool that maps disadvantaged communities based on income and pollution burdens. And but what we do not know, which we would like some feedback on, is are there tribal communities that would fall within that designation? And if not, what are other ways that we can help to ensure more accessibility? We are in conversations with other state agencies that have been able to expand the definition. We are going to talk to a CPUC later today about how they have made tribes eligible under their programs that historically have used CalEnviroScreen.
Thank you. Brian Newman Lindsay also has a question.
Just before you guys go ahead, just on that point of the CPUC, CPUC under their SGC proceeding, and I believe the microgrids proceeding, have basically just defined within those proceedings and those rulemakings tribes as disadvantaged communities. So kind of, instead of relying upon CalEnviroScreen, just kind of bypassing it. But I also think that there's an effort for CalEnviroScreen to just do the same, where it's just going to the tribal lands, or at least federal recognized tribal lands, are going to just be already considered DACs without any further need for consideration of income and pollution. So Brian.
Good morning, everyone. Hopefully, Sophie, Jerry, you don't mind if I chime in. I'm a colleague of theirs who helps run this program, and I wanted to offer a couple of potential points on these two questions of like DAC status and maybe a clarification on lead and partner applicants, because I think that's a very important question for how tribes might get involved in the TCC program. So under the TCC program, the guidelines have established that CalEnviroScreen is the primary way we identify like eligible regions. But that's not established in the statute. So I think I just wanted to note that, as everybody's been saying, that's currently under review, and we're trying to look to see if there's ways we could expand eligibility just using other criteria, or if CalEnviroScreen will be expanded. And I wanted to say here, and I don't know, Jerry or maybe Sophie would be better placed to explain this, but lead and partner applicants here relate specifically to the community stakeholder structure that's a component of the TCC program. TCC applicants are required to identify a lead who has the capacity to kind of run and manage a complicated project, but that lead entity is intended to partner with local community groups, nonprofits, and other entities to help guide and shape specific project delivery as well as community vision. So I think the clarification here is that under the previous rounds of funding, a tribal government had already been identified as a viable lead applicant categorically, but non-federally recognized tribes may not qualify automatically to be partner applicants. It would probably depend on what their role in the project was and what their relationship was to the lead applicant. Jerry, Sophie, do you want to comment on that or expand on that, or the question about like what partnership requirement might look like?
I think that's accurate. And the one other addition I would make is that oftentimes the partner applicants are leading sub-projects under the entire grant. So they may be leading like a transportation project or an affordable housing project or a greening project. Or community engagement. So there are many ways to be partners on one of these grants.
You have a series of questions I think you're trying to, have the group here consider, and I'll just read those aloud for those that didn't see in the chat. So SGC is looking for feedback on what parts of the TCC program would and would not work for your communities. What do you think about the eligibility criteria for lead and partner applicants? We've been talking about that. Collaborative stakeholder structure and partnership requirements. I guess I'm not sure what the question is there, but project types funded. So you're asking tribes like what types of projects they would want to see funded, and then what are technical assistance needs. So I guess I'll throw that out there to the group, and if any of the Strategic Growth Council folks want to clarify. We have about 4 minutes left, so we don't have too much time left. Okay, so no specific feedback on any of those. I have a question on this slide right here. Round 4 implementation funding opportunities as one of the future funding opportunities being considered. Is our planning grants also being considered?
Josh, that's correct. Yes, planning grants are also part of this round 4 funding.
Okay, so I guess before we turn to wrap it up, any other questions or comments from anybody either on the TCC program or the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities program?
Josh, I just want to comment that, it's really nice to have Strategic Growth Council here to present. And this is sort of a live version of why we were doing the tribal gaps analysis in terms of we're trying to figure, part of that study is trying to understand where there are maybe a need for clarity or improvements in some of the solicitations that are already existing for tribes, and where we might be able to make some recommendations for ways to make it a little bit easier to access. And so these conversations are really good. Just want to thank the Strategic Growth Council for their interest in really wanting to make these more accessible to tribes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thanks so much, Jerry and Shep, and then the rest of your team as well for, bringing this information. And we're going to add this and ensure it's in the tribal gap analysis database and be able to provide more updates as the opportunities become available. So, next steps are kind of wrapping it up today. So as a reminder, please sign up for the gap analysis questionnaire if you haven't already. It closes at the end of September, and the more tribes that provide input, the better feedback agencies like CEC, like Strategic Growth Council, and really the dozens and dozens of agencies across the state are eager for this feedback from tribes on exactly how they can better develop these programs and serve and help tribes advance their energy and climate needs. So you can just register at caltribalgapanalysis.org or follow me directly. Also, if you have ideas or preferences for future speakers, topics, also, please email me if there's any agencies, California agencies you would like to hear from on these topics as well. Then we can begin to reach out. And then our next meeting is going to be held on September 21st, tentatively for 11 a.m. That may change. In that meeting, we are going to present a copy of the CTGA funding database that with a comprehensive list of funding opportunities for tribes to pursue energy and climate needs and goals. And it's also going to be a bit of a grant writing workshop as well, with some guidance and some tips and even some templates. And Prosper does a lot of that work and does grant writing workshops. So we're just going to share the information to hopefully give you some tools as you identify opportunities using that database to be able to better position yourself to obtain funding. Any last thoughts or questions? Let's see, there's a few things in the chat. Yeah, and then as Strategic Growth Council has asked, if you have any feedback, please email it to them. You're welcome to email it to us directly as well, and we'll pass it along, and we'll likely send a follow-up email around. But okay, I'm not seeing anything else. Thank you so much. Thanks to Strategic Growth Council for showing up. Thank everybody for joining us today. These are really great, engaging discussions, and we look forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks.